Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Thought Dakota's YouTube channel. My name is Sean Mixon. I am the director of Reasonable Faith Dallas. Today I am joined by none other than Mr. Richard M. Evans, who is a recent author of a very interesting book that he's going to discuss with us today. If you would like to purchase the book after during or while or after viewing this interview, click on the link that we have in the description. The name of the book is Roswell, Area 51, and God. This is the first book of a series, and Mr. Evans, it's a plum-pleasing pleasure to have you with us today. How you doing?
Hey, it's great to be here. Thank you, Sean. And brother, I appreciate the offer to come and talk with you. This is an interesting topic to me.
All right. And so you gave me a picture here to put up, and I think we'll just go ahead and see if we can share this picture, and you can tell us what we're looking at and get right into it.
Okay. I had a very unusual childhood, which started a lot before your childhood started. It was a long time ago. My father joined the Army Air Corps right after Pearl Harbor was invaded, and he stayed in the Air Force for 30 years. And the reason we're showing this photo here, my dad is on the right. He was a colonel, and he eventually became the base commander of the Air Force Base at Roswell, New Mexico. And the gentleman he's shaking hands with is Major General Douglas Nelson. My dad's name, Colonel Ivor Perry Evans, and the general on the left, Major General Douglas Nelson. Major Nelson was the commander of Area 51. So none of this is fiction. None of this is make-believe. This was real life for my dad and for my sister and me and my mom. We were raised on air bases, and that included the Air Force Base at Roswell. Everyone's heard of not everyone, most people have heard of the UFO crash of 1947. Well, it was the Roswell UFO crash of 1947, and it did crash outside of Roswell, New Mexico. So since God gave me this very unusual history, and I'm a Christian, as you are, of course, and I wanted to write a book that talked both about my dad's history and some of the history of Roswell and the history of the UFO crash at Roswell. And since I'm a Christian, I want people to know about God. So I included a chapter in there, which I hope will help prove to people that scientific evidence has now virtually eliminated the possibility that life originated on Earth accidentally. So I'll save that until we're ready to talk about it. But if you know someone, and most everyone does, who does not show much interest in Jesus and God, but they are very interested in UFOs, well, I hope this book would be a good book for them to read, because while they're reading about the UFOs, they're going to come across this chapter that shows that life is no accident. Okay, so that was like my main motive for writing the book. Oh yeah. Before we get to this video, you want me to tell why that video is coming, or you want to talk about something else a little bit here first?
Yeah, so you said that the crash of 1947, how do people know, how do we know that actually happened?
Okay, first of all, there was a rancher in he was really closer to the town of Corona, New Mexico, but actually the rancher's name, his nickname was Mac Brazel. He was managing a ranch between Roswell and Corona, New Mexico. And at night he heard an explosion. What was that? There was a thunderstorm, but he said, that's not thunder. This is something different. So the next day he went out to investigate, and he came across all this debris on the ground It was, they say it was 600 feet across, you know, as a field of debris. And the way that he described it was a silvery material, similar but not the same as aluminum foil, but something like aluminum foil, shiny bits, sticks, rubber, things like that. Okay, it's not what most people would think of as a UFO, but eventually he reported this to the sheriff of Chaves County. Chaves County is the county where Roswell is located. And the newspaper got hold of it. And on July 8th, 1947, they printed the headline that says, "The Roswell Army Airfield has captured a flying saucer." Okay. And that's where the term came from. And you know, we've heard of UFOs and flying saucers ever since. But at any rate, not only did rancher Mac Brazel see this debris, he gathered up some of it before he went. You know, it was like 2 weeks before he went to Roswell to talk to the sheriff. And in that time period, also others like his daughter, his son, his wife, they went out on another trip to the place where the crash. They gathered up little bits of something similar to aluminum foil and paper and sticks and things like that. They could never figure out what it was. And when they contacted the Army Airfield, Roswell Army Airfield sent out a gentleman named Major Jesse Marcel. He was the intelligence officer for the base. And Marcel and Mac Brazel, the rancher, they gathered up some of this stuff. They tried to figure out, well, could this go to a kite? You know, could this go to, they could not figure out what it was. And so Major Marcel brought the crash debris back to the air base at Roswell, New Mexico. In my book, I tell about a hangar, a huge aircraft hangar, and I can tell people how to get within about 40 feet of that hangar and get a photo in front of it if they want to. But Major Marcel took the debris to the base commander, and the base commander and Marcel had it loaded onto a B-29 bomber aircraft in this hangar at Roswell Air Base. And Major Marcel and the debris flew the next morning from Roswell Army Airfield to Fort Worth Army Airfield. And the general in charge of a wide area of air bases, he called in the photographers at that point, newspaper photographers. And if you look up General Ramey and General Ramey and Major Jesse Marcel photos, you can look that up on the internet, and you'll get the photos. And I've probably seen those before, of Major Marcel standing in front of the debris that was found by rancher Mac Brazel. And then the next day, after July 8th, it was July 9th, General Ramey announced, this is not a flying saucer. This is just a weather balloon. Okay. And so for the next 30 years, the story just pretty much died. It's like, we thought it was a flying saucer, but no, the general says it's a weather balloon. And so but then after 30 years, UFO investigators got involved, and the story started up bigger and bigger and bigger since then. There's no way this is a weather balloon, and there's a lot of fiction stories out there, but there's a lot of true stories out there. But yes, there really was a crash. Yes, something there, anything that's flying that you can't identify is a UFO, unidentified flying object. So a UFO did crash. Now, what most people think of when they say UFO is aliens, space aliens, okay? Intelligent aliens. Now, that's a different story. There was a UFO crash. I'm not going to tell people until book 2 what evidence I have about whether it's aliens or not, but I will tell that in book 2. But I want them to know what evidence is in book 1 so that they'll be convinced that book 2 is really accurate. Okay, that I'm not just making up stories. Well, one thing I use to prove that I'm not making up stories is that photo you just showed. Okay, not too many people have a dad shaking hands with the commander of Area 51, and their dad is the commander of Roswell Air Force Base. By the way, the name of it was not the Roswell Air Force Base. I say that because everyone's heard of the Roswell Air Force Base. The name of the base when my dad was the base commander was Walker Air Force Base. And when I lived there, when my family lived there, it was Walker Air Force Base. But it's the same base as the Roswell Army Airfield. They just renamed it.
Okay. So it seems like a farmer or someone who lived near this crash site heard a crash site and went out by himself to see what it was and saw aluminum foil and things like that and sticks and stuff, right. Which, as you said, that doesn't, when you think about a flying saucer, you don't think that it's made of, sticks and aluminum foil.
Right.
And it seems like that news article that came out kind of did a little sensationalism. They went from the sticks and the foil to a flying saucer. So in a way, it seems like they kind of prompted some of that.
That is a possibility. And however, something did crash. And also before the Roswell crash, there were also crashes in the state of Washington. I said crashes. There were UFO observations in the state of Washington and Idaho, also in 1947, shortly before the Roswell crash incident and before the Roswell flying saucer newspaper headlines. Okay, so there really was something going on. I don't think I've even told you this yet, Sean, but in 1964, I saw the 1964 version of what crashed in 1947. I wasn't even born in 1947. I did not see what crashed in 1947, but I did see the 1964 version of it, and that may not make much sense until part 2 of the book. But but again, I'm just telling you that so you realize I'm not just making up dreams or something. That there is something really to it. People were reporting.
So why didn't you said so after the major or the commander who was over multiple Air Force bases said that this wasn't a flying saucer, it was a weather balloon. It kind of the interest kind of died down until 30 years later, and you said that they later on said that this couldn't be a weather balloon. Why was that?
Well, one of the people that investigated it 30 years later was named Stanton Friedman. Okay, he was a physicist, and he was looking at these reports of what happened in Roswell. And, basically almost nobody heard of the Roswell incident except people near Roswell, even though it was in the headlines. Other people have heard of other UFO incidents, like I said, in Washington State, Idaho, and other places. But as far as the Roswell incident, very few people had ever heard of that specific incident except for those living near Roswell. But when Stanton Friedman, and I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of his book, but Stanton Friedman wrote a book about the Roswell incident, and he's a physicist. And that's when the interest really started uprising for the Roswell incident and the Roswell UFO incident.
Was it called Top Secret or Crash at Corona?
Oh, it might be Crash at Corona. That sounds familiar.
1994, 1992, the U.S. retrieval and cover up of a UFO.
That could be it. Stanton Friedman is the author. I've got some books here, but I do not have his book here, and I think one of his books is The Crash at Corona, and that may be the one that we're talking about. Yeah, he wrote more than one book. Also, later, a gentleman named Colonel Philip Corso wrote a book, and in that book, he talked about people at the hospital at the base at Roswell seeing aliens being brought in to the base hospital. And what I tell in part 1 of my book, Roswell Area 51 and God, is my sister and I and my mom and dad lived in 2 different houses about 1,000 feet from that hospital that they're talking about. And whoever reads the book, I put in the exact map coordinates where they can either virtually go look at where that hospital used to be. The hospital is not there now. They've torn it down. But I give you the exact location. The foundation of the building is still there. And they can get a photo. They can get on to what used to be the air base. And they can get a photo at the foundation of the hospital where Colonel Philip Corso claims that alien bodies were taken into the hospital there. Okay.
And was he what was his position at the time?
Colonel Corso was not even in the Air Force. He was in the Army. He was a very high-ranking intelligence officer. Okay. And he says that the Roswell crash debris eventually was stored right near his office, and it's some central state. I can't remember, it's Kansas, or I can't remember what state he was in, but he says the debris from Roswell eventually came and was stored in the same building where his office was located. And he gives the names, and I give the names that Colonel Corso gives as witnesses to having seen alien bodies being taken into the hospital at the Roswell Army Airfield.
With these witnesses, how are they? Can they be verified, or has anyone spoken to them?
Now that's a good question. I haven't verified it. I'm reporting what he reported. I am not reporting. I'm not reporting what I saw. I didn't see that.
Okay.
And like I say in the book, I was not even born in 1947. Okay. So I did not see any of this with my own eyes, but I'll tell you what I did see is I saw the 1964 version of what crashed in Roswell. Obviously, I saw it in 1964. I'll talk about that in part 2. And then something else I tell in my book is, although my dad was not the base commander of the Roswell Army Airfield in 1947, he was stationed in 1947 in Washington State at a different Army airfield in Washington State. So he's got a lot of connections to this Air Force or this UFO story. Some things he showed me with my own eyes, but obviously he never showed me anything that was secret at the time he showed it to me. Okay. I'm sure it was secret before he showed it to me, but here's an example. To the east of Roswell, we drove by this highway many times. Like, you see nothing. If you're driving, if you've ever been to the countryside around Roswell, it's bleak desert, okay? And you can be 50 miles from any point you pick, and they all look the same. It is like bleak desert. So we were back and forth on this highway east of Roswell. And then one day, my dad took me, and at the same location I had driven by many times and seen nothing, there is a huge Atlas missile sticking up out of the ground. Okay. And so he showed me that. But the reason he could show me that is because obviously, let's assume you're a rancher out east of Roswell, and you think your next door rancher buddy is just a rancher, and all of a sudden you see a huge nuclear Atlas missile out in his backyard. Well, you know, they were calling the cops and calling the Roswell Army, but what's going on? There's a missile. Well, by the time that had happened, then my dad could show me. So after everybody else who lived within 10 miles of this guy saw the missile in his backyard, well, then it's not secret anymore. So then my dad could show me. So that's the kind of things my dad would show me. He would never, ever think of showing me or anybody else anything still secret. But he could show me that missile because everybody for 10 miles around had already seen it. It wasn't secret anymore.
Well, this explains why when you watch older movies from the 60s about aliens and they show the flying saucers, they always look pretty cheap to me. They look like foil paper, or the paper that goes in, you know, your air conditioner, the tubing. It always looked kind of like that, or the washing machine tubing that goes to the back of your vent for your dryer. And I always wonder, like, could they not just, think of anything? Maybe they were trying to be realistic to the materials that this one guy found.
Maybe they're trying to be realistic on what he found, because that is the kind of stuff that he found. However, it's more likely that they're cheap movie makers, and the only stuff they could make it out of was their dryer vent.
Yeah. And so, that's very interesting. And so, what do you talk about in this book, in this first book?
In the first book, another thing I talk about, which is very, very strange. There was a gentleman named Kenneth Arnold. He was a private pilot. He was flying his plane near Mount Rainier in Washington State, and he saw 9 UFOs. He followed them. You know, I don't mean he followed them with his plane, but he followed them with his eyes while he was flying his plane near Mount Rainier. And they went from near Mount Baker, which is like 100 miles away, to Mount Rainier. And then I think it's Mount Adams, which is south of Mount Rainier. So they covered that territory very quickly. So by the time that these objects got to Mount Rainier, Kenneth Arnold, the pilot, started timing them. Okay, he had a clock on his airplane. I think he also had a watch, but I think he was timing it with the clock on the front of his airplane. And in, I think, 1 minute and 42 seconds, these 9 objects went from Mount Rainier to Mount Adams. And that's a distance of something like 45 miles in 1 minute and 45 seconds. So he did some fast calculations while he's flying the plane, and he figured that thing had to be going 1,200 miles an hour. When he landed the plane, he figured it out more accurately, and they figured it out 1,700 miles per hour. Okay. Well, this is back when no airplane went that fast. Chuck Yeager was the first one to break the sound barrier. Sound barrier is approximately 700 miles an hour. And Chuck Yeager did that in 1947, but he did it after the UFO crash, not before. So now there was something that went faster than 1,700 miles an hour in 1947, and that was missiles. You know, they had the V2 missiles, the German missiles that the Germans bombarded Great Britain and Netherlands, and I don't know what all. They were bombing mostly London. those were supersonic. They went much faster than 1,700 miles per hour. So there were some things that went faster, but they were not airplanes. They were not nothing that people got into in 1947. And so that brings up a lot of questions. What could be going that fast? You know, that you could see 100 miles away and then 25 miles away to the left and then another 25 miles away to the right. What could that be? And then another gentleman named Harold Dahl, D-A-H-L. He and his son and a couple of people that worked for him were out in a boat also in Washington State in Puget Sound. And straight above them, they saw something donut-shaped. And this is the part that nobody believes, but I believe it, okay, is liquid metal fell out of the donut-shaped object. Some of it hit his son and injured his son's arm. Also, his dog got killed, the dog that was on the boat. Now, I think Harold Dahl later said, oh, he's just making it up. But I don't think he was making it up. Okay. And I will explain that later too. But what I'm saying is the people reporting that they're seeing things, they were seeing things. Now, it's a matter of interpretation if they were correctly interpreting what they were seeing, but they were seeing something. Okay. And it's not just make-believe. But let me get back to this second chapter, the chapter about God. This is what I want. This is why I think, if you know, I know some young people, relatives and friends. I know some young people that some of them say they believe in God, but they haven't yet said they believe in Jesus. Okay. Some of them just say, no, I don't believe in God, or I don't believe in that Bible stuff, you know. I hope that my chapter 2 that shows them that life could not have happened accidentally based on the newest scientific evidence, I hope that'll make them reconsider. Even though they're buying the book or somebody's giving them the book about UFOs. It's not about, I mean, God is in the title, Roswell, Area 51, and God. But what makes people interested in it is the Roswell Area 51 part for a lot of people. Okay. They're not like you and me. We're interested in the God part, but a lot of people are not. Okay. So this book is hopefully going to help the people that are not to reconsider.
Okay. And you gave me a video to share.
Yeah. Oh yeah. We didn't talk about this yet. Okay, at the same time that the materialists are saying life had to have happened accidentally on Earth, I'm sorry, I'm coughing. It had to be before 3.8 billion years ago, because that's how old the oldest life on Earth is 3.8 billion years ago that they have evidence for. Well, before 3.8 billion years ago, it wasn't some nice pleasant weather. And I would like you to play this video. What the video is showing is an asteroid collision with Earth, and the scientists say this happened about at least six times before 3.8 billion years ago. And just play about 2 minutes, and then I'll talk to you, and maybe we can skip forward to the very end. But watch what this asteroid does to the Earth.
Moving at 20 kilometers a second, stopping at 20 seconds, delivering all of its energy in doing so. And you produce an enormous explosion. The amount of energy that is released in this event is more than enough to evaporate the world's oceans.
A massive asteroid from outer space heads straight for Earth. It's as large as the one that impacted over 4 billion years ago. This computer simulation has been made with the scientific advice of geophysical experts to show the effects if the impact were to happen today. The asteroid's diameter is larger than the main island of Japan. Even though it is moving at over 720,000 kilometers an hour, that's almost 450,000 miles an hour, the asteroid appears eerily slow because of its size. The actual impact happens in the Pacific Ocean, just under 1,000 miles south of Japan. The crust of the Earth is peeled away like an orange skin by what is called the crest tsunami. Even the deepest part of the Pacific Ocean looks like a thin film. Huge chunks of debris the size of city blocks are hurled into the air. The entire Japanese archipelago is disintegrated, as is some of the Asian continent. The shattered remains are hurled out into space way beyond the atmosphere to bombard the Earth with deadly intent when they re-enter.
John, can you hear me?
At 7,000 meters, 20...
Yeah, very good. At the end of that video, the entire Earth is surrounded by superheated rock vapor. And why this is so important is that was happening at the same time that the materialists are claiming that life had to have happened accidentally on the Earth. Well, it didn't. That's what was happening. And this is something fairly new that they've only discovered since the Apollo astronauts brought back rock samples from the moon that showed at what time the craters on the moon and now people wonder, why don't we see all these craters on the Earth? Well, it's because of weathering and because of plate tectonics. Okay, the signs of those same craters on the Earth have mostly disappeared, but they know it happened on Earth. The scientists know it happened on Earth because of all the craters on the moon, and now they can date those craters on the moon. And there's a huge number of what we just saw in that video. That was happening 3.8 billion years ago and before. But remember, the oldest life is 3.8 billion years old on Earth. So obviously, the beginning of life had to come before that. And what was actually happening then was what's in that video.
So you're saying that the meteorite splash or shower happened 3.8 billion years ago. In the beginning, the first life form was dated to 3.8 billion years ago. Yeah. So the question is, how can anything live with all of that destruction?
Right. What that shows is there was a very sudden origin of life. It didn't happen over billions of years, okay? The scientists tell us that Earth is something like 4.56 billion years old. Well, there's not billions of years between 4.56 billion years ago and 3.8 billion years ago. So billions of years are not available for life to exist. It existed 3.8 billion years ago. If you want to know a scientist who tells you that, I tell it in my book, but Dr. Minik Rosing, he's from the University of Copenhagen. Dr. Minnick Rosing has ionic evidence for 3.8 billion year old photosynthetic life. And the rocks and the lunar rocks that were brought back by Apollo astronauts, also brought back by unmanned Luna satellites, Russian Luna satellites. And also we have naturally blasted meteorites that have come from the moon to the earth, and scientists have found a lot of those. They could study all of them, and by studying all of them, they've discovered what's called the late heavy bombardment. And the late heavy bombardment was from about 3.8 to 4.1 billion years ago, when Earth was just being hammered, and so was the moon, and so was Mars, and so was Mercury, by enormous asteroids, which in some cases, like in the video, completely surrounded the whole planet with superheated rock vapor. Not a very good atmosphere for developing life.
Hmm.
If
Wow,
it melts
so
rock,
now they,
if it melts rocks, it's not going to be too good for life. Or vaporizes rocks.
so would that same temperature have been all over the planet, or
All over the surface of the entire planet? Yes. If people want to look up the video that we just saw 2 minutes worth of, if you look at the end of the video, the whole planet is surrounded by superheated rock vapor. But here are the keywords to look up on YouTube. Miracle Planet asteroid simulation. Miracle Planet asteroid simulation. Look that up in YouTube, and you'll find the same video that you just showed us, Sean.
okay? And you said Dr. Minnick Rosing was the one who published this research.
No, Minnick Rosing is the one. Well, he published the research about the 3.8 billion year old photosynthetic life. Yes. I also give the reference to that in Roswell Area 51 and God Part 1. Yes. I give more references to what I've just talked to you about, the rock vapor and the asteroids and the 3.8 billion year old life. I give more references to that than anywhere else in the book. So because that's the part people are going, oh, he's mistaken, he's wrong. That can't be, because the scientists say it happened accidentally. Well, the scientists are showing it couldn't happen accidentally. So people need to be able to look up these references.
And you say it couldn't have happened accidentally because it's the improbability of life surviving within those conditions?
Exactly. Plus the life that Dr. Minnick Rosing found ionic evidence for, that's 3.8 billion years old. It was photosynthetic life. Okay, the reason that they know that is they compare the carbon 12, carbon 13 percentages. The scientists are the ones that have to do that. That's way too complicated for me to figure out, but I just trust them. And people have checked him. Yep, he's right. That's the correct percentages. Life existed, photosynthetic life existed 3.8 billion years ago on Earth. And it's also correct that 3 billion years ago and before, Earth was being slammed by those enormous asteroids that surrounded the whole planet with superheated rock vapor. And I don't care what scientist you are, if the heat is strong enough to vaporize rock, there's no life that can survive that. A few scientists have said, oh, well, maybe life was deep underground. Well, that's possible, but it was not photosynthetic life. Photosynthetic life has to have sunlight to live.
Okay.
Or some kind of light. And deep underground, it's dark. Okay.
Okay. So those are two facts, if you will, that need to be explained. And how did photosynthetic life survive when the Earth's surface was uninhabitable for photosynthetic life?
Yes, yes. I hope I explain it a little better in the book, but I've given you the general idea of why life didn't just happen. And also, I refer to Dr. James Tour. Dr. James Tour at Rice University in Houston. Look up his, if you want another set of keywords to look up on YouTube, look up Dr. James Tour, Origin of Life. You'll probably find 20 videos from him. Watch one of them. So in addition to all the problems I've talked about with life being surrounded, or Earth being surrounded by superheated rock vapor, then all the problems Dr. James Tour mentions, in addition to that, show that life did not just happen accidentally.
You know, I haven't heard this argument raised before. I think it's pretty interesting. How did you come upon this?
Well, my whole life I've been, you know, not whole life. My parents were Christians. They raised me to believe in the Lord, and I've also been in science, you know, interested in science as long as I can remember. And yeah, it's a problem when you hear in school things that make it sound like, you know, life did not come from God. I mean, I don't remember any teacher coming out and saying life didn't come from God, you know, but they said a lot of other things that made you think that's what they believed and that's what they wanted me to believe. And so I started looking up everything I could find. And when I found something, I would write it down. And you can probably tell I'm an old geezer. So I've had a lot of years to write those things down. And something wasn't matching up on the materialistic view that life just happened accidentally, you know, 4.3, 4.2, 4.1, 4 billion years ago, whatever it was. No, it didn't. You're just forgetting about the other scientists that show, like what Dr. Minik Rosing has shown, and what others, I haven't mentioned all the scientists, but what the video just showed you. Oh, here's another name to look up. Dr. William Bottke, B-O-T-T-K-E. William Bottke SETI, S-E-T-I. And then also after those keywords, put late heavy bombardment. You will find a video from, and he's with NASA, and he talks about objects hitting the Earth even larger. You know, the one we saw in the video was 500 kilometers diameter, 300 miles diameter. Dr. Bottke says there are some bigger ones before those. So before what we just saw in the video, they were even bigger. We're talking about 2,500 to 3,000 kilometer objects.
How was the Earth not destroyed?
Well, that's how the moon was formed. Something slammed into the Earth so big and so hot that the moon was formed. But yeah, you wonder, well, how was? But that video that I mentioned about SETI and Dr. Bottke, it has a model that shows how it could happen where the planet wasn't destroyed, but obviously the heat from something like that melts and then vaporizes rocks, and no heat like that is going to permit any living thing to survive. I mean, if it's melting rocks and it's vaporizing rocks, life can't survive that kind of heat, period. But people did not know this 50 years ago. Before the Apollo astronauts, they didn't even know that the dates of those craters on the moon and craters on the Earth. Now they know.
Could you spell Minik Rosing, the one who
yes, and in the book,
photosynthetic life,
if you get the ebook, the Kindle book, you just click on the link on some of those references. but Dr. Minik Rosing, M-I-N-I-K, Rosing, R-O-S-I-N-G. Dr. Minik Rosing. You can find his scientific journal articles. I think the first one said photosynthetic life before 3.7 billion years. I list a reference in the book of a video you can look up where he said, no, made a mistake. It's 3.8 billion years ago. He said it was at least 3.7 in his academic article, which is from the 1990s. But the more they found now it's 3.8 billion years ago there was life on Earth.
And William Botke, his Botke is spelled B-O-T-K-E?
No, B-O-T-T-K-E.
T-T.
William F. Botke, B-O-T-T-K-E. If you want to look up his SETI video, put William Botke SETI late heavy bombardment. You'll find the video I'm talking about. Somewhere about 25 minutes into that video, he talks about enormous objects larger, 2,500 to 3,000 kilometers in diameter, slamming into the Earth. I don't believe there's any scientist ever that believes that any living thing could survive that. Even the ones that claim, well, maybe life could have survived underground. No, the whole planet is beyond molten. It's vapor. Anyway,
wow.
The whole surface of the planet and miles down.
So on this theory, the Earth would have had to cool again.
Yeah, it took a long time to cool again. Right. Well, now, like I said, the ones that were 3.8 billion years ago were not quite as big as these 2,500 kilometer ones. But the video shows a 500 kilometer object hitting Earth. And sure, I think the video itself says the entire planet Earth was surrounded for 1,000 years or more by superheated rock vapor. Eventually, yes, it would cool down, and finally rain would start falling again. And of course, we know it cooled down because we're here now and it's not vaporized.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Evans, this has been a fascinating conversation today. It's very educating, and I appreciate that argument you gave from an angle that I haven't heard any apologists give an argument from the fact of the late heavy bombardment. And so I think that's very interesting. That's some fodder for any budding apologists to investigate. I know I'll take a look at that. And but thanks for coming on. And
hey, I've enjoyed it very much, Sean. And you're my brother in Christ, and you're my Reasonable Faith Apologetics brother too. So I appreciate it. And please, if you're watching this in a recording, I hope they look up that book, Roswell Area 51 and God. Look up some of the references so you can confirm that I'm not making up stuff.
All right, and then his book is actually in the description, so you can just click on the description of this video, and you can purchase the book. It will take you directly to Amazon. But thank you, Mr. Evans, for joining us again tonight. You've been with Sean Mixon, the Thought Decoder, also the Reasonable Faith Dallas chapter director. And until then, next time, remember to think better.